What on earth do you make of the reports we're reading this morning as I was just saying, via the Ukrainian Prime Minister, saying that those few Ukrainian defenders still within Mariupol will fight to the end. They're not going to surrender.
Well, I would say top marks for their determination to be prepared to do that. But I think by any objective analysis, their situation is pretty hopeless. They've been holding out for, well, over 50 days, haven't they? They must now be getting extremely short of ammunition. And they're certainly short of other options. Clearly, the rest of the Ukrainian army isn't in a position to resupply them. I think the awkwardness of this is those who are defending are predominantly from the Azov regiment, which, if you look at the origin of that organization, look at some of their insignia and their flags, they do make use of the swastika symbol. So when the Russians have talked about denazifying, I'm afraid they are focused pretty much on this Azov regiment. And I'm afraid that's probably why they are not going to surrender, because as individuals, they know that they're going to come to pretty harsh treatment. So I think, sadly, they've got no option but to continue to hold out and to fight, because, well, I think their future's pretty bleak. But obviously, top marks to them for their determination to hold out. But I think their position is pretty hopeless now.
And they are, as we understand it, within some of the large network of tunnels under this steel plant, which is in Mariupol. So incredibly difficult for the Russians to actually try and get at them. Many people are concerned that this is the point at which Russia turns to chemical weapons, or even worse, to try and finally get an advantage on them and take Mariupol, what would be their first city, like major city.
Well, I think that is quite possible. I mean, the Russians will continue to flush these remaining defenders out. And in a sense, from their point of view, they must do so, because one of their strategic objectives is to complete this land corridor from Crimea through Mariupol into the Donbass, and therefore linking Crimea to Russia proper, which is one of the objectives that they set out at the start of this war. So yes, they may well resort to tactics such as the use of chemical weapons, or some other device to try and flush out these remaining defenders, who, as I said before, will be very determined, because they've got very few options themselves. And I think they realize that their treatment, should they surrender or be captured, will be pretty harsh by the Russians.
And we're meant to be entering a sort of second phase of this conflict now, after Russia said that they would be focusing in the east and not necessarily trying to attack Kyiv or other cities. That somewhat hasn't held up in the past few days, as we've seen bombing and shelling in various cities across Ukraine, most notably this morning, as I mentioned, in Lviv, all the way out in the west, where some people have unfortunately died. What can you glean from the tactics of the Russians, who are still trying to focus on the east and, as you say, catch the Donbass, but also seem to be almost scattergun, attacking residents, whoever, in cities around the whole country?
Well, I think we have to see this as part of one operation. And if you like, I'll put it in classic military terms of deep operations, close operations, and rear operations. And I think what we're seeing, and bear in mind that General Alexander Dvornikov has now been put in command of what is likely to be the big push that the Russians will try and make from the east. That strike, when it occurs, will be, in the context of deep, close, and rear operations, will be their close operation. But what we're seeing with strikes in Lviv and elsewhere across central and western Ukraine is what I would call the deep operation. And that's really trying to achieve two things. One is to endeavor to erode the will of the Ukrainian people to want to go on resisting the Russians. And I think that'll fail, because we're seeing a great spirit from the Ukrainians. But we are probably more seeing this deep operation being designed to inhibit the Ukrainians' capability to keep weapon supplies going to their troops in the east. We've seen them striking missile factories and other armaments depots throughout Ukraine. So I think we have to see this as part of a continuum. these cruise missile strikes right through the country are the deep operation, preparing for the close operation, which will be the advance that the Russians will try and make to finally capture Luhansk and Donetsk provinces.
And in terms of the equipment that they're using in this, of course, we've heard no end about Russian tanks and how they have been sort of easily picked off somewhat by the Ukrainians. The Times reports this morning, though, that supersonic Russian strategic bombers have been used for the first time in Ukraine, particularly over this steel plant, which has become a stronghold in Mariupol, using dumb, unguided bombs. Just explain for us about them and what their use at this stage necessarily means.
Well, I think as far as the use of dumb bombs is concerned, it is now agreed that the remaining defenders in Mariupol are within this extended factory complex, which spreads over really quite a large area. So therefore, from the Russians' point of view, their need to use expensive cruise type missiles that can be accurately targeted against that factory site, there's much less reason or need to do that, given that they are very expensive and supply is an issue. So therefore, to use dumb bombs from aircraft onto a large target just to deliver large amounts of explosive ordnance as a way of trying to break the will of those remaining defenders, or indeed trying to kill those remaining defenders, given, as you said earlier in the conversation, many of them will be down in tunnels underneath that complex. Using large amounts of high explosive is a way of trying to get at these people and indeed try and kill them.
General Lord Dannatt, thanks for your time this morning.